This is a sincere and earnest message and appeal to Ottawa Police Chief Peter Sloly. I offer these suggestions and thoughts humbly and an effort to contribute to the peace and maintaining the peace in Ottawa. Chief, I noticed that you are trying a new tactic lately in response to the protests. I understand that you are having your officers seize fuel from the protesters, and I have some concerns about this approach and perhaps the approach overall, and I'm hoping that you might take some of these things into consideration. With the seizure of fuel, my concerns are numerous and in no particular order. One, and I'm certainly not a lawyer, but I question the legality of seizing property. I'm not sure if there's a technicality or if we're using the fire department to perhaps say that having the fuel is unsafe, but it is clearly of questionable legality. More concerning though is, frankly, sir, it is making the Ottawa Police Services and perhaps you personally look petty. You were able to temporarily stop the flow of funds by having GoFundMe get shut down, but very quickly people are raising money through other avenues. I think the same thing is likely going to happen with the fuel seizures. It's not going to have the effect that perhaps you think it'll have, and again, it makes you and the men and women who serve under you look petty. And it likely won't work. I've seen these people on the streets being inconvenienced by having some fuel taken is not going to make them leave. The only way that this tactic may work, and that word work, we could differ about what that means exactly, is if the fuel seizures are seen as a provocation, and perhaps that's what you're hoping to do. I hope that's not the case, but it's hard not to read it that way, where perhaps you're hoping, or others are hoping, that the protesters will respond violently, giving the police then a legitimate right to shut things down. That is not a good solution to this problem. It's interesting, I think we need to question some of the bigger things, like what is your objective as police chief and as the head of the Ottawa Police Services? I've heard you say on several occasions that it's your goal to end the protests. And I've worked in large organizations where we can say things like that, but it's important to stop and question whether or not that is a reasonable goal for a police organization to have. Politicians might have that goal, but I don't know, sir, if it's your place to make that the aim of your service. I think a better question for you to ask is not how do we end the protest, but rather how do we best do our duty to uphold the Constitution and maintain the peace while these protests are happening. These are certainly trying and challenging times, and I recognize that it must be incredibly stressful to be in a position like yours. You have all kinds of people criticizing you, from government, from the residents, to protesters, perhaps your own staff, questioning your leadership, pulling you in every which direction. And it's difficult. I've noticed, sir, that you do look a little stressed and uneasy at the last news conference I watched. And I worry, sir, that you are perhaps losing your grounding. I'm not sure, sir, where you find your grounding, but it seems that that you are being buffeted about. And I would encourage you to find some grounding. There's a verse in the Bible that comes up at Christmas time a lot, and it's from the book of Isaiah, and I'll read part of it. It says, "For unto us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders." And from what I understand of that verse, part of the business about the government being on his shoulders is it comes from ancient times where leaders would wear often chains or some heavy metal on their shoulders to symbolize the burden and responsibility of being a leader. As chief of police, you wear a crown on your epaulets, and those signify not just your authority, but the burden of responsibility that you bear leading the men and women of the Ottawa Police Services. It's a difficult job. Most people would not do well in it. And I ask you how you do ground yourself. The job I'm doing now is much less stressful. I recently started working in a woodworking shop making wooden windows. And one of the things we need to do when making windows is making sure that the corners are square and true. And we can't trust our own judgment often. The human eye can deceive us. What looks like a square corner often isn't a square corner. And that's why we use a gauge like this one to make sure that things are square and true. We often need a reference that's outside of ourselves and outside of our own feeling to know if we are on the right track. And I'm curious where your reference point is. There's another story in the Bible that comes from the book of Amos, and I'll just read a quick line here. It reads, "I saw the Lord standing beside a wall that had been built using a plumb line. He was using a plumb line to see if it was still straight." And again here, I think the reference is, where do we draw our frame of reference? What, in times of stress and upheaval, it's so important that we have a reference point that is steady and true. I took the liberty, sir, of putting together a press release that you're welcome to use. I put it together just a few minutes ago. You're welcome to use it word for word or use it as a basis for another press release, and that's free for you to use, and you certainly don't need to attribute it to me. And I'll read it and I'll place the text of it in the description to make it available to you. We are living in unprecedented times around the world, and most certainly here in Ottawa. It seems everyone has very strong opinions about the protests, about the protesters' grievances, and about the role of the Ottawa Police Services' response to it. The Ottawa Police Services itself contains a diversity of opinions on all manner of topics amongst its members. As police officers, we have a sworn duty to do our utmost to not allow our own personal or political views to interfere with our duty to do our jobs with the highest level of professionalism and integrity. It is therefore not the place of the Ottawa Police Services, nor any police services in a free and democratic country, to have an opinion about the validity or invalidity of the political grievances protesters may levy against their federal or provincial governments. And it is certainly not our business to use our views about those grievances to inform our approach to how we police the city while the protesters are here. Rather, it is our sworn duty to uphold the Constitution of Canada, maintain the peace, and apply the rule of the law. As police, we are not concerned about why people are protesting, only how they are protesting. There is debate and a multitude of opinions amongst residents and politicians at all levels of government about how exactly to resolve this protest. The goal of ending the protest may be a legitimate political aim, but ending the protest in and of itself is not the ultimate aim that should guide our actions as police officers. Ending the protests would only become our aim if somehow it was clear to us that ending the protest was necessary for maintaining the peace. As long as the protests remain peaceful, it is not the purview of the police to seek an end to the protests. Citizens in this country have rights that are enshrined in our charter. As long as the protesters are exercising those rights peacefully, we will not interfere. For as long as the protests remain peaceful, the police will remain present to ensure that the peace is maintained and to ensure the safety of our citizens. As I said, Chief, you're welcome to use that. Sir, our decisions matter. Where we draw our strength matters. It's important perhaps in times like this to frame our decision making not just in the here and now. There's the expedient solutions. We could listen to politicians, we could listen to our staff and their opinions, and it might be helpful to frame our decisions not just in this moment, but through the fullness of time. How will history remember your actions and our actions during this time? What stories will your children or grandchildren and future generations of Canada tell about how you handled this situation? That story is still being written. You have a chance to change it now. Now, some people might say that you've already committed to a certain narrative and perhaps it's too late for you to change that now. I disagree. I think as long as there's breath in your lungs, there's always the opportunity to turn away from our past mistakes and to choose courage. I personally am weak. There are countless times where I did not choose courage. I'll share one example. I have a dear friend. I count her a sister in Christ. And a few years ago, we were talking and there's other people there. And somehow it came up sort of almost offhandedly, and she shared that a very close family member had died by suicide. And it didn't quite fit with the conversation we're having. And here's what I did. I pretended I didn't hear it. I didn't choose courage in that moment. It was easier for me to do the expedient thing and just let the conversation continue. In that moment, I fell short of the high expectations that are put upon me. Was it too late for me? No. A few days or perhaps a week later, I can't remember, I went to this dear friend of mine and I apologized. I admitted to getting that wrong. And she was gracious and she forgave me for not getting it right in the moment. It's never too late to choose courage. I was looking at this police services manual called Honor, Courage, and Service, and it's dedicated to the officers who have given their lives in the line of duty in Ottawa. And I think when police officers choose to be police officers, there's part of them knows that there is some chance they might lose their life. And I think they make that decision consciously. So if you choose courage, there could be consequences. Conceivably, you could lose your job or get demoted. Those are prices to pay, but they're less than the people who've given their lives for the same cause. When we're buffeted about and when we choose courage, things can be scary. There's another line from the Bible that I like, especially as a former firefighter, and I think it applies to anyone and certainly to people in the police services. And it reads, "When you pass through the waters, I will be with you, and through the rivers, they shall not overwhelm you. When you walk through the fire, you shall not be burned, and the flames shall not consume you." And that's also from the book of Isaiah. Sir, when you choose courage, you will get strength, and you will be able to endure what comes. Chief Sloly, choose courage. Chief, choose courage for the legacy of those who've gone before you. Choose courage for the future generations of Canadians who have yet to come. Chief, choose courage for the men and women of the Ottawa Police Services who serve under your leadership. Chief, choose courage for the glory of your Creator and all things that are sacred. Chief, choose courage.